in the water. God's a gonna trouble the water. Mary McLeod Bethune was born in South Carolina, July 10, 1875. 10 years after Abraham Lincoln abolished slavery in the United States. Her parents were former slaves, and her great-grandmother was an enslaved African. Her grandmother told Mary stories of her father, a great chief from Africa, which initially instilled in her the dignity of royal lineage. As a child, her one desire was to read and write. Her parents possessed great faith. Mary recalled they would pray, and the next day everything would be all right. She prayed to the God of her parents for the ability to read and write. Shortly thereafter, the Presbyterian Church approached her parents, inviting Mary to school. It is extraordinary to realize Mary was picked out of 16 siblings for this experience. She saw this as a direct answer to prayer. Perhaps due to this belief in answered prayer, and perhaps knowing her destiny lay directly with her education, Mary walked 5 miles a day to school. According to her mother, she seemed to know that education was the way out of poverty for her and her family. Whereas other kids were forced to go to school, Mary looked forward to the experience daily. Eventually, her teacher secured a scholarship for Mary to the Presbyterian Board of Missions Scotia Seminary, which she attended from 1888 to 1894. Upon graduation, Mary attended Moody Bible Institute for Home and Foreign Missions, where she received a well-rounded perennialist education. She wanted to go to Africa as a missionary. The missionary board voted against it. She decided to become a missionary to her own people, first as a social worker, then as a teacher. Africans in America needed Christ and schooling just as much. My life work lay not in Africa, but in my own country. She remained in Chicago for 1 year. There, her dedication to public service strengthened through her work visiting prisoners in jail. She served lunches to the homeless and gave assistance to people living in the growing slums of the city. In 1895, she returned to Sumter County and took a position as a teacher with the Presbyterian Board of Education, teaching at her old elementary school. Unhappy there, she requested a new position elsewhere, and in 1896, Mary moved to Augusta, Georgia, and began teaching at Haynes Normal and Industrial Institute. Mary was only at the Haynes School for a year. It was here Mary came to believe the way to improve the lives of all Black people was through educating Black girls and women. I believe the greatest hope for the development of my race is in training our women thoroughly and practically. In 1897, she met Albertus Bethune at the Kendall Institute, and the two were married in 1898. Albertus retained employment at Savannah, Georgia, so they moved. They had a son, Albert. She continued to do social work while she was busy taking care of her home and family. Mary heard about the plight of migrant Black workers in Palatka, Florida. She felt a call to move there and began an outreach program by visiting prisoners in the local jail. There she read and sometimes sang to them. Her husband could not find work and ended up leaving the family for South Carolina. To care for herself and young son, she taught, did social work, and sold life insurance. In order to fulfill her calling to educate Black girls and women, she began her own school. She settled in Daytona Beach, Florida, a spot where wealthy white folk congregated. Many Black families also congregated there as they were working on the railroad. They were looking for a place to educate their children, and Mary took advantage of the opportunity. In 1904, she found a cottage next to a dump. She convinced the property owner to take a down payment of $1.50 and went to work recruiting tuition and donations to pay the $11 a month rent. She looked in the trash cans of the nearby hotels that housed wealthy white customers. She found barrels for desks, old carpets, which she repaired herself. She used elderberry juice to make ink for the students' inkwells and burned wood to fashion pencils. I hunted the city dump and the trash piles behind hotels, retrieving discarded linen and kitchenware. Cracked dishes, broken chairs, pieces of old lumber, everything was scoured and mended, she said. In October of 1904, the Daytona Educational and Industrial Training School for Negro Girls opened with only 5 students, each paying a tuition of 50 cents a week. She seems at first to follow the social efficiency model of education in the development of her curriculum. She focused on the health and well-being of African American girls first, but then included boys. This school may have been Mary's first, but by her school's opening, she was an experienced teacher. Her experiences under great teachers included Booker T. Washington, gave her the confidence to develop courses, and she learned how to fundraise in order to gain support. She also learned how to work the political system and the wealthy establishment of her community. The curriculum of her school reflected her philosophy that the financial independence of each young woman would be the key to success in life as an African American living in the Deep South. In addition to academic and religious studies, her students were expected to learn the domestic skills that would help them find jobs to support themselves: housekeeping, weaving, cooking, sewing, etc. Mary's teaching philosophy initially could be considered social efficiency model. Mary believed that her girls needed skills to integrate into the society in which they were established. However, there was a strong emphasis on faith and service, as well as a personal interest in each individual student. The school was not strictly curriculum driven. During her struggle to get her school going, she had a dream Booker T. Washington visited her. Holding out a dirty handkerchief from him, he produced a large diamond, which he handed to her and said, "Here, take this and build your school." Mary took this as a heavenly sign to move forward with her vision of educating African American girls. In 1906, her school was a success. She needed a larger building. Mary cooked pies as well as a myriad of other things to raise money. One of the more successful ventures she tried was to utilize the arts in her fundraising. She taught her students to sing. She then spoke to the managers of local hotels, asking if her students could entertain their guests. While she and her school entertained these wealthy white guests, she would pitch her school's goals to them. She solicited wealthy business persons, and in 1907, with the help of one wealthy businessman, she was able to purchase land and build a brick school. Mary became a master at fundraising. She followed the example set by Booker T. Washington, and besides wealthy individual donors, she sought the donations of wealthy white organizations. She got $62,000 from John D. Rockefeller in 1905. That's $1 million in today's terms. She reached out to organizations and solicited wealthy and well-connected women from around the country to serve on the Women's Advisory Board. Women serving on the board were active in generating publicity and fundraising for her school, as well as offering guidance on administration. In an attempt to sell her school on the benefits of educated Blacks, she sought out powerful white men to sit on the trustee board. Men like the inventor of ivory soap, James N. Gamble of Procter & Gamble. She held integrated Sunday afternoon community meetings to entertain and inform the members of white society about the school's goals and successes. The school grew and she added more courses. By 1916, she was able to offer a complete high school curriculum, including nursing, teaching, and business classes to fill the needs for more Black teachers, nurses, and secretaries. By 1920, the school had 351 students. She renamed it the Daytona Normal and Industrial Institute to reflect the changes in the curriculum. Mary had a hard time fundraising for her school. No matter how noble liberal Democrats felt at the time, there was an underlying shadow of racism. Black schools were underfunded and served a poorer segment of the community. Since her school did not receive money from the state, it was not accredited. Because they served Black students, they could not receive state funds. Mary ran herself ragged fundraising. In 1923, the school merged with the Cookman Institute for Men from Jacksonville, Florida. This now co-ed Bethune-Cookman College served as many as 800 students and offered junior college level classes. The curriculum at Bethune-Cookman was comparable to that offered by the white Daytona High School. It was considered to be the best school for African Americans in Florida by an official on the General Board of Education. Bethune continued to serve as the president of the college from 1923 until 1936, at a time when few women held similar positions elsewhere. She was extremely proud of her students and used her school as an exhibit for donors and curious tourists. She showed off what could be achieved by educating African American youth. As word of her dedication to her cause and perseverance spread, more donations were received. Eventually, what had started out as a small rented building next to a dump grew to a 32-acre campus with 14 buildings and 400 students, and even included a farm to be more self-sufficient. In 1936, her expanding duties elsewhere began to take up more and more of her time, and she reduced her responsibility to only serve part-time. By 1942, she was forced to resign because the work of constant fundraising was taking a toll on her health, but not before she managed to turn Bethune-Cookman College into an accredited four-year college. In addition to her work at the school, Bethune did much to contribute to American society at large. She served as the president of the Florida chapter of the National Association of Colored Women. Bethune also became involved in a government service, lending her expertise to several presidents. President Calvin Coolidge invited her to participate in a conference on child welfare. She served on the Commission on Home Building and Home Ownership for Herbert Hoover. However, her most significant roles in public service came from President Franklin Roosevelt. In 1935, Bethune became a special advisor to President Roosevelt on minority affairs. That same year, she also started up her own civil rights organization, the National Council of Negro Women. Bethune created this organization to represent numerous groups working on critical issues for African American women. She received another appointment from President Roosevelt the following year. In 1936, she became the director of the Division of Negro Affairs of the National Youth Administration. One of her main concerns in this position was helping young people find job opportunities. In addition to her official role in the Roosevelt administration, Bethune became a trusted friend and advisor to both the president and his wife, Eleanor Roosevelt. Bethune spent the rest of her life devoted to social causes after leaving Bethune-Cookman College in 1942. She took up residence at the National Council of Negro Women headquarters in a Washington, D.C. townhouse in 1943 and lived there for several years. An early member of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, she helped represent the group at the 1945 conference on the founding of the United Nations along with W.E.B. Du Bois. In the early 1950s, President Harry Truman appointed her to a committee on national defense and appointed her to serve as an official delegate to a presidential inauguration in Liberia. Eventually returning to Florida in her retirement, Bethune died on May 18, 1955 in Daytona, Florida. She is remembered for her work to advance the rights of both African American and women. Before her death, Bethune penned My Last Will and Testament, which served as a reflection on her own life and legacy, in addition to addressing a few estate matters. Among her list of spiritual bequests, she wrote, I leave you a thirst for education. Knowledge is the prime need of the hour. Bethune closed with, if I have a legacy to leave my people, it is my philosophy of living and serving. Since her passing, Bethune has been honored in many ways. In 1973, she was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame. The U.S. Postal Service issued a stamp with her likeness in 1985. In 1994, the U.S. Park Service bought the former headquarters of the NCNW. The site is now known as the Mary McLeod Bethune Council House National Historic Site. This year, a statue of Mary McLeod Bethune will be installed in the Capitol Rotunda. She will be the first African-American figure to be honored with a monument in Statuary Hall in the United States Capitol. Bethune's statue will replace the statue of a Confederate general. Any discussion regarding Mary McLeod Bethune cannot be separated from her faith. Her extraordinary faith goes hand in hand with anything she accomplished. Her faith gave her purpose, direction, and courage to achieve her goals. Due to her personal experience in a missionary school, she knew faith was deeply connected to social justice issues. This sense of purpose created an unstoppable force in her. Her first order of business every morning was prayer. In her last will and testament, she shared that faith, hope, and love were the foundation of her life. She clung to these as she endured incredible financial burdens, prejudice, and personal hardship. She was quick to integrate, but never ignorant to the ways of business and power. When she took a group of her college students to the beach for a ride, the police stopped her. They told her she could not be on the beach, even though it was 100 yards from Bethune College. With tears in her eyes, she defied the police and continued her ride, humiliated that her girls had to experience the indignity of racial prejudice. When some local businessmen heard of the incident, they purchased the beachfront property for her. Naturally, the property became valuable and white businessmen became interested in developing it. She turned to the Black community for investment. She wanted African Americans to control the property but open it to all races and ethnicities. It seems this sense of purpose to instill dignity in her race was the catalyst to her vocation. She lived in the present, one day at a time, looking for the opportunities reality afforded her and dealing with crises as they arose. An observation by Mary gives a clue to her inspiration regarding the importance of education and self-dignity. She realized as she read books on science, math, English, philosophy, there was no color differentiation. Knowledge was colorblind. Knowledge invited different points of view. There was no black or white way of perennial knowledge. There was different experiences, but all led back to an underlying truth reflected in the Declaration of Independence. An incident that discouraged her to the point of depression occurred when she was accused of being a communist during the McCarthy era. She was set to speak at a school when they abruptly canceled the engagement. The indignity of her being subversive to the country she loved and served caused a deep depression in her. Mary had successfully used American exceptionalism, the patriotic sense of nationalism, to elevate her community, and now she was being punished for that. The backlash the school board received was so fierce they had to issue an apology and let her speak. Mary McLeod Bethune's humble power was transcendent. Her fearlessness exemplified as she walked through a train station in the Jim Crow South. She entered through the whites-only section of the station. The station master waved his arms incessantly, telling her she cannot be in that section of the station. She kept walking, ignoring him. She had such quiet dignity and poise. The confused station master turned to someone and said, "She is an N-word, ain't she?" Mary knew she was a beloved child of God. She lived from this identity, and because of this, she was unstoppable in her quest to uplift African Americans.